Hi, I'm Paul Guppy. I'm Vice President for the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular weekly update of what's going on in Olympia as our respected lawmakers of both parties get together and pass laws that are going to affect the lives of everybody in our state. We've been tracking legislation and committee action very closely. Our staff has been participating in committee testimony, writing legislative memos on bills, providing analysis and commentary, and also talking to the media. So we are all about informing the public as to what our elected representatives are doing, both for us and to us down in Olympia. We're about halfway through the session. The most recent cutoff date that just passed was on January 31st. That's the date after which bills that have not been passed by at least one committee in the House or the Senate are theoretically dead for the year. And this cuts off many hundreds of bills that don't get considered in committee. It cleans up the work of lawmakers, so it kind of narrows things down as to what they're focusing on, but it also is an ironclad. So no bill is ever dead until the legislature adjourns for the year, which this year is on March 8th. So until that happens, any bill that I say that is not passed in committee doesn't mean that it's necessarily dead for the year, but it is a good indication. So I'm going to go through some of those. So in the next cutoff date is on February 5th, and that's the date for transportation-related bills to pass in committee. And then after that, the next key cutoff date for bills to survive the process is February 13th, and that's the last day on which a bill has to pass either in the House or the Senate in order to be considered by the opposite House. So mid-month is when the next deadline is for passing legislation. So regarding key bills, one that was really, I think, pretty scary, died in a Senate committee, which was surprising to everybody because it had a lot of support among the Democrats. Republicans opposed it. Washington Policy Center thinks this is a horrible idea, and that particularly is SB 5961, and that would impose rent control all across Washington state. The original bill said that landlords would not be able to raise the rent by more than 5% in any 12-month period. That bill, to the shock of a lot of people, died in committee. But there's an insider story. The reason it died is because there was an amendment added to the bill which raised that percentage cap on how much rent could go up from 5% to 15%. The idea being that this provides more latitude for landlords to raise the rent to meet their expenses. It also, you would think, reduces the market distortion of what a price control does. So every price control from ancient times to today always has one single effect, and that is it reduces supply. So if you put rent control, reduces the supply of housing. There's just is no question about that. And so the idea was to raise the cap up to 15% in this bill, and that way it would have less of a restriction, which is certainly true. But it also has another effect, and that is the ratchet. So any landlord that is, or any producer that is operating under a price control situation will always maximize whatever the law allows. So even though a price control is supposed to keep the lid on increases, what it ends up doing is guaranteeing a minimum increase. And the reason is because a producer of any good or service is going to say to himself, if I don't raise my prices by the amount allowed by law, then I lose my chance. So a 5% rent cap over any 12-month period means that any sensible landlord will be obligated to raise the rent at least 5% every year. Otherwise, it's use it or lose it. And the same is true with 15%. So it turned out that supporters of this bill ended up arguing against their own bill because even they realized that a 15% increase in the rent was unsustainable, but they didn't seem to make the connection that it was their own idea that was causing this problem. The reason that free market rents work, from our view, is that, first of all, that's part of justice. It's only fair for a person who owns property to be able to decide how much they want to sell it for, whether it's products or renting an apartment or anything else that's provided in the economy. And the other one is that it involves fairness, which is it's an agreement between the buyer and a seller, which is voluntary. And when the government interferes, it distorts that. That's what price controls do. So in the short term, it's good that this bill died in committee. A version of the bill did pass in a House committee, so the idea is still alive. We were complimented in a kind of sideways sort of way by one Democratic senator, Annette Cleveland from Vancouver. She said, Many researchers have documented real-world problems that have been caused by existing rent control programs in other parts of the state. And that's us. A lot of people argue that as well, so we won't take full credit, but Washington Policy Center is one of the researchers who's out there arguing against this idea. We were happy to be sort of semi-cited by a Democratic member. The activists for the Low Income Housing Alliance said that they said that rent was a key driver in rising housing costs. Okay, but if what she failed to note is that government policies and regulations also add to the cost of government. So we don't see that there's a balanced view on how to handle affordable housing. But lots of studies show, including our own research, that government policies and taxes add at least 20% to the cost of rent and private housing. I think it's closer to 30%, but a conservative number is that between a fifth and a quarter of the cost of providing housing in the private marketplace is imposed by the government itself. So we think they should look at reducing taxes and regulations. That would make everything more affordable. Next, I'll see what else passed in committee. Some other bills that are not so great, but we'll see what kind of effect they have. So what also passed is HB 2270, and that would create a state Department of Housing. Again, more government. Sure, let's make housing more affordable by creating a gigantic bureaucracy devoted to housing. We don't think that's a good idea. Another bill, more controversial, that passed is SB 5777. And this would, again, proposed by Democrat pro-union members, would provide state unemployment benefits to workers who decide to go on strike. This is something that teachers' unions have been pushing for a number of years. Every school year, there are a number of strikes across the state as local unions bargain with school districts. If teachers are able to go on strike and still get paid through this unemployment insurance system, that obviously makes the unions in a stronger position. So that bill survived in a Senate committee and will now go on to the House. Two positive bills that passed were HB 6205 by Republican Senator Jim McCune. This will require the teaching of the meaning and history of the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. We see this as a reaction to a lot of what's going on in schools to try to begin teaching basic civics, help people understand what the meaning of the country is, and in this case, focus on the Pledge of Allegiance. And another bill, HB 1961, would increase penalties for animal cruelty, again, introduced by Republican Senator Sam Lowe, who's from Lake Stevens. What was interesting about this bill is that it passed the Senate by 95-1. I'm not sure who the one senator is that would vote against a bill like this, but I highlight it because it indicates that there are lots of bills where Democrats and Republicans do come together and pass. This anti-animal cruelty bill is a good example of that. So there is bipartisan work that goes on in Olympia all the time. And now on to some more good news about bad bills that failed in committee. And I'll just run through these quickly because we've been tracking them for quite some time. So the bills that did not pass in committee and technically are supposed to be dead for the session are the following. SB 5427, that's the hate crimes hotline bounty bill, where the Attorney General wanted to pay $2,000 to people who report a hot crime. That bill didn't make it. SB 2150, which was an effort to keep Trump off the ballot in Washington state. That bill failed as well. An important bill, SB 5770, that would have repealed the voter-approved 1% limit on tax increases. That bill failed, and so the 1% limit remains in place for now. HB 2030 would have allowed prisoners serving time to vote. Again, a nonsensical bill that died in committee, thankfully. HB 2177, that would have required appointing a sex offender to the Sex Offender Policy Board. That bill died in committee, and again, a nonsensical idea that was considered briefly. HB 1868 to ban small gas motors in maintenance and lawn equipment. That bill failed as well. We're pretty sure that idea is going to come back in the future, so we'll keep an eye on it. And then the last one, HB 6064, again, a price control. This would have imposed a limit on how much landlords could charge for having a pet in the apartment. Our analyst, Mark Harmsworth, pointed out that by limiting the fee, which has no relation to the damage that can be done on a property by a pet or the cost of having a pet, by imposing a limitation, it's the same as banning the pet. So that would be the practical effect of that bill. I think the lawmakers got the message, and that bill died in committee as well. So that's the rundown of some detailed bills that we've looked at. The overall picture, which is coming up later in the session, is readjusting the budget, as you would expect. Which way is it going to be adjusted? Yes, upward for sure. The state is realizing almost $3 billion in additional revenue that they didn't expect. A lot of this comes from Jay Inslee's carbon tax. This is a giant pot of money that's floating around in Olympia, and there's no talk of tax relief, which is what we push for. So we think that this money will be added to the current budget. That will bring the general fund budget to $72 billion. And total state spending, we often get this question. Okay, operating budget, general fund budget, $72 billion. What is the total amount? So out of all accounts and pass-throughs from the federal government, Washington State spends about $136 billion in every 2-year budget cycle. So the budget information we give is just a fraction of the entire amount. And then the other big item that's really disrupting the session, at least for Democrat leaders, are those popular initiatives from the people that have been now certified by the Secretary of State. There are 6 initiatives on police pursuit, repealing the carbon tax, parental rights bill, long-term care payroll tax repeal, a number of capital gains tax repeal. All of those qualified. They all come from popular movements across the state. The sponsor of those initiatives is now reporting that upwards of 2.4 million people signed those, or that might not be the right number actually, but it was more than 1 million at least of people signed these petitions, and each one got more than 430,000 signatures individually. The reason I'm qualifying is because some people signed all 6 signatures, some people only signed 1, and so how it's counted depends on what you look at there. The other thing that the sponsor reports is that a large proportion of people who signed these initiatives were independents and Democrats, in addition to Republicans. So that's sending a very strong signal to the legislature that they need to deal with these issues. The Democrat leadership has not announced any schedule about committee hearings or considering the initiatives. So they have about 30 days to deal with them, and we'll see what happens. They could pass some of them. The police pursuit one and the parental rights in school one are very popular. So some people are thinking the Democrats will just pass those quickly to get them off the table, maybe put the other initiatives on the ballot. The last thing that they need to think about is, how does this drive turnout in the fall? One calculation is that if popular initiatives are on the ballot, then that's going to help Republicans bring out their base. Democrats may be trying to avoid that, and we'll see how that plays out. Lastly, our Washington on the Go series will again be live online on Tuesday. That's February 6th. Our young professionals group is having a social get-together at Flatstick Pub in Redmond, and that is on Thursday, February 8th. And any other information about events is on our website. And with that, thank you very much.